Excited to have you all. I'm Dylan Chapple. I'm with the Delta Stewardship Council and a team of us from the Stewardship Council, as well as the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians and the California Indian Environmental Alliance, have been involved with planning this. We'll talk a little bit more about that process as the day goes on. Thank you all for giving us a little beat to kind of give people some more time to come up from downstairs. We say, well, it's better to have too much going on than not enough going on this topic. Yeah, we're really happy that you all found us up here and that we will be sharing this morning with you. Before we get started, I also did just want to draw your attention to the fact that this is the first in a three-part series. And so the slide up here links you to the registration for the other days. So you do register sort of separately for each of the days. So day 2 will be back here in person as well as on Zoom. And you can register on Eventbrite there for the in-person participation. And then day 3 will be fully virtual. So we'll talk a little bit more about that process also later in the day today. But we, again, just really appreciate you all being here with us today. And I'm going to just briefly go through our agenda for the morning, and then I'm going to hand it over to our partners at Shingle Springs. And so shortly we will hear a ceremonial welcome and song from Malissa, Tayaba, and other members of the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians. We really appreciate them being here with us this morning to help us open this. We'll hear a welcome and land acknowledgement from Chair Julie Lee at the Delta Stewardship Council. Will come back to me then, and I'll give just an overview of the Roundtable series. And then we have our exciting keynote presentation from Brian Wallace with the Indigenous Futures Society. So we're very thankful to have Brian here with us today. Take a break from about 10:15 to 10:30, and we'll reconvene with a panel that we've sort of called Interweaving 101. So do's and don'ts for interweaving traditional knowledge. So we're going to hear from a variety of folks who are experts on this topic from a number of perspectives. So over the morning, we also just do really want to encourage you to sort of be open. Many of us are here wearing our work hats, but many of us are maybe here sort of half wearing your work hat, or maybe even not wearing your work hat at all. And so a big part of what we're trying to take away from the day today is to really create a space where we can, sort of bring our full selves to this room. And some of the topics we cover, might push our boundaries a little bit. And we're just looking forward to you joining us for this conversation. So with that, I would like to welcome Vice Chair Malissa Tayaba of the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, who is going to give us a ceremonial welcome and then introduce some of her singers. Thank you, Vice Chair. Round of applause.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Tayaba. Yes, I'm the Vice Chair for the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, and I am so happy to be here today with a lot of people. It tells me that things are changing, and that's a really good thing. My tribe, I just want to talk about my tribe a little bit. We are the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians. We also were known as the Verona Band of Homeless Indians. And before that, our elders actually referred to us as the Nisenan Pewanan people. And so I know the names are very confusing and misleading, and a lot of people really don't understand that. And so I wanted to explain that to you guys. I come from the villages of Kadema, Pashune, and Wolok. Kadema is actually located right off Watt and 50. The village of Pashune is at Discovery Park. It's what you guys know as Discovery Park. And then the village of Wolok is where the Feather and Sacramento rivers meet. And that is also one of our villages. And so we are located actually just 40 miles east, actually in Shingle Springs. And we spent the last handful of years attending a lot of different meetings and really trying to get across to people who the tribe is and where we're from and why land and Mother Earth is so important to us. And so we've spent a lot of time talking about our creation stories and how we are connected to the Sacramento River, the American River, and the Feather Rivers. Some of my other hats that I wear, I am the director of traditional ecological knowledge. And so some years ago, that is how, we ended up really trying to educate our tribal members, teaching them traditional skills, teaching them how to gather, how to make traditional regalia, how to make shelter, transportation, and food. And so while we're doing that, it was very, very obvious that we had to find a way to protect our waterways, and that would be the first task in TEK. And so I think that was something that we didn't really think about. We kind of just did it, and all of that work is actually leading to us sitting here in this room today. So I'm so thankful that, some of our voices are actually being heard. It means a lot because for tribes, how we use the waterway it's our life way. It's not just an option. It's actually things that we need. And so I hope that today's session, you guys are able to learn a little bit about the tribe, but also, tribes can come in a room and we can give all of this information. But if that information isn't being used, then what is the point? And so I hope that in your day to day, you really consider what tribes need, what Mother Earth actually needs. We believe that Mother Earth is alive. We believe that water is alive. And so if we can have that train of thought of how do we conserve this place, not only for Native people, but for all people, that's what we have in common here. It's not just my kids, it's all of our children that we have to save what is left. And so with that, I'm here to acknowledge this land that we're standing on, the Nisenan Pewanan territory. And today I have two singers, and they are going to sing us a song. We have Troy, who is actually from the Wilton Rancheria, and we have Petey, who is actually from Central Valley, Miwok. So we'll have them sing our song.
Yeah, if everybody can stand and let's get if they're able to. Just want to say good morning to everybody, and like Melissa said, just think about those things that she spoke about, and we're just here to share a song. To hopefully your day goes good and your health is good. Oh, wait. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple, yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple, yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple, yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple, oh, Chapple, oh, Chapple, yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Oh, Chapple. Oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Oh, Chapple, oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple. Yeah, yeah, oh, Chapple.
Didn't want them to stop. Before I leave, I just wanted to, you guys can all sit. Thank you guys for the beautiful song. I wanted to share with you guys, we're here today. If we weren't here today, we'd be at home building boats. We have a Thule boat race that's coming up on July 11th. This boat race is hosted by the regional tribes, so United Auburn, Wilton Rancheria, and Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians. I'm bringing this up because, well, one, I really didn't want to leave, and two, I'll be going back to those boats. But it's a good example of what tribes do with natural resources and how we use them. We're going to be building boats for the next week. If any of you guys would like to stop by, you are more than welcome. We're building boats made out of round Thule. Round Thule is obviously something that used to be on this land all over here in the Sacramento region, but it's a plant that's actually really hard to find now, especially for tribal people. The way the systems are, you know, and private ownership and all of the above, tribes just can't go get Thule somewhere. It has to be planned out. You have to have a permit or a relationship. That's a lot of hard stuff for some people. And so I wanted to just acknowledge this plant, Thule, because it is an awesome plant. If you don't know about this plant, Thule, Google it tonight. She is just beautiful. I love Thule. I love going to the Thule patches. She has provided housing for us. She has provided boats for us. We can even eat her when she's in a baby root. She, after the boats, we'll be doing some Thule houses, and then of course our girls will be making Thule skirts. And so from one plant, those are all of the things that tribes are using for one plant. And this plant, and this is why I'm telling you this, if you guys know where Thule is, let us know, because we need it. And it's important to us. Right now where we get Thule, you know, it's a designated spot. And so it means we're penetrating one area at one time. And so if any of you guys know where any great Thule is, please let us know, because we're always trying to figure out where to harvest and where we can get it. And so I just thought I would share that with you guys, because as you guys go on with your day, this is exactly how tribes are using natural resources that are so important to us and to all of us, and how much our waterways actually need that plant back into its system. Thank you. Have a good day.
Melissa, just briefly.
Awesome. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're following guidance that small appreciations are an important part of this process, and bringing some of that to our partners in this. So thanks again to our singers, to Vice Chair Tayaba, and to all of our partners at Shingle Springs who contributed to the planning of this process. So with that, I would like to introduce and bring up Chair Julie Lee from the Delta Stewardship Council, who will share the formal welcome on our behalf.
Good morning. My name is Julie Lee, and I'm chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. I'm pleased to welcome you today to the launch of our Interweaving Traditional Knowledge Roundtable series. Thank you all for being here and for taking part in this shared learning experience. We invite you to stay for lunch, which is being provided, and to continue the conversation this afternoon during the Delta Climate Adaptation Team Visioning session. Before we begin, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement, which is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as the original caretakers of this land. It honors the deep, ongoing relationships between Native communities and the land, relationships that have existed for thousands of years and continue today. We acknowledge that the Delta watershed and larger Bay estuary are located within the ancestral territory of and have been continually occupied for thousands of years by the Native peoples of numerous villages and tribes, including the Bay Miwok, the Coastal Miwok, the Plains Miwok, Mayadu, Nisenan, Ohlone, Patwin, Homo, Wapo, Wintu, and Yokuts, who make up the tribal groups both recognized and unrecognized. We wish to show our respect to them, their ancestors, elders, and relatives, and advance tribal equity by acknowledging that injustices inherent in a violent history of colonization and dispossession and their unique statuses as First Peoples. We recognize that the Delta Stewardship Council and other organizations here today are guests on these traditional homelands. Tribal communities have been stewarding our natural environment since time immemorial, and there is much that we need to learn from the Bay Delta's tribal communities about stewardship. Please consider that although this statement acknowledges the ancestral and unceded territories of the original Native peoples, excuse me, of the Bay Delta, additional steps are required to move towards meaningful restorative justice. This roundtable series, through its programming and collaborative spirit, encourages building beneficial and constructive relationships that support tribes in restoring their role as land stewards, guardians, and elevating and integrating traditional knowledge. My voice is going to give out, sorry. And Native communities in supporting a healthy and resilient Bay Delta and its watershed. We offer this acknowledgement as an invitation to reflect on our place in a shared history and our responsibilities in the present. It calls us to recognize the enduring impacts of colonization, displacement, and erasure, and to acknowledge and honor tribal sovereignty, stewardship, and knowledge in meaningful and ongoing ways. We offer this acknowledgement with humility, recognizing that no single statement or event can fully capture the depth and diversity of Indigenous relationships to this place. We hope that today's events will help attendees continue the process of learning from and listening to our tribal and tribal serving colleagues. And with that, I'm going to hand it back off to Dylan Chapple in our Delta Science program to give us an overview of the Roundtable series.
Thank you, Julie. Every time I stand up here, I remember I'm tall. A little bit of a reach, so do my best not to hunch over. So thank you so much, Chair Lee, and thank you, Vice Chair Tayaba again, and the singers for your opening remarks and song. So it's been a real honor to work with Shingle Springs on this event, and specifically I'd like to thank Crystal Moreno and Zach Chagone from Shingle Springs, and Sherry Norris and Michelle Rivera from the California Indian Environmental Alliance for planning this event in partnership with our staff at the Delta Stewardship Council. I also want to specifically acknowledge Shoko Shinbrat, who's not able to be with us today, but has been the driving force between this series and other related initiatives at the council that you'll hear about today. So I do just want to acknowledge again, it's great to see you all here in the room and online. We come together today in the spirit of partnership. To move forward in this spirit, I want to echo Chair Lee's land acknowledgement and underscore the impacts of colonization, displacement, and erasure are not easily healed. Each step towards repair is admittedly a small step, but ultimately a number of small steps make up a journey. Across 3 events in this roundtable series, we intend to help provide a path for some of these steps, not to get us to an ending point, but to a beginning, or for some of us a stop along the way for the long journey. I want to make it clear that this process will not solve any of the big issues we have ahead of us. We hear frequently from our tribal partners that it's important not to overpromise. Nonetheless, the Adult Stewardship Council staff and our partners in this series feel it's important to provide the opportunity for continued learning and relationship building. To this end, I'd like to draw out your attention to the image behind me. This is a photo from about 1 month after a culturally informed burn led by Dr. Don Hankins and Austin Steve Knott, who's downstairs today, in partnership with Molly Farrell and Tyler Anthony at the Department of Water Resources. This project is an example of how state agencies can work with traditional knowledge holders on the ground to try new things and link them with science. So far, this project is showing that the burn site is taking up carbon faster than the adjacent unburned site. And this early work provides a path forward for future efforts along these lines. If you'd like to learn more, you can zoom in on that QR code there. And of course, just as important as the science behind this project are the relationships that made this complex project happen. In the end, this series and our time together today is about building relationships with each other and with the landscapes and living beings that we steward. And so even though we're here in this large bureaucratic building, we of course bring our human selves to this space. So in the spirit of human connection, in a moment, I'm going to do something that probably everyone's going to go, oh no, but please bear with me. So I'm going to ask you to turn to your neighbor in just a moment here. But instead of sharing who you work for or what you work on, we all spend plenty of time talking about that. If you can just briefly share your name, where you call home, and something about yourself that's not related to your job, like something you did this weekend, an upcoming trip you're excited about, or an update on your kids or pets. And when your neighbor shares, be sure to ask them at least one small question in response. And since I'm up here on my own for now, I'll kick us off and just share that my name is Dylan. I currently call Sacramento home, and my daughter just learned to crawl in the last 2 weeks. So now she follows the dog around the house. So this, I figure, covers both kids and pets. But a quick warning, if your follow-up question for me is how I like being a parent, be prepared for 10 minutes on how amazing my daughter is. So just block off your calendar accordingly. But I'll spare you that for now, and I'll turn it over to you all for just a minute or two to turn to your neighbor and just share that little bit, your name, where you call home, and just a little bit about your life. One question. So, go for it. Don't get me started. To you. Sweet to hear everyone's voices in the room and not just my own. So maybe just 30 more seconds. All right, in the interest of time, I'm gonna ask everyone to wrap it up. A good problem to have, though.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much, everybody. I always love in a room like this when you have, the person standing up and everyone's being very quiet and respectful. Thank you so much. But flipping it back out to you all, just filling the room with your conversations is really just a nice part of running an event like this. So thanks all for indulging us in that. And I hope you learned something new or got to meet someone you didn't know already. And of course, just underscoring, we don't necessarily have to be coming from the same perspective to talk, share, and get to know each other. These relationships are ultimately the basis of all the work we do, and they're particularly important in the context of working with tribes and tribal serving organizations from an agency or consulting or whichever sort of more bureaucratic perspective. So we hope that you can take some of the conversations that you started in this little moment here into our coming breaks and lunch. So our coffee break will come up in about an hour or so. So just a little preview there. So to now get us started and just orient us around this day briefly so that you have a sense of how this, what we're doing here today fits in with the bigger picture of other things that we're doing at the Stewardship Council. I'm just gonna run us through a few different things. So the first, I'm actually gonna reverse the order of these slides. So the first here is what do we mean when we say traditional knowledge? And just briefly want to touch on this. And so based on our conversations with tribes and others, the council chose to use traditional knowledge to broadly describe the body of knowledge held by tribes and indigenous groups, which includes but is not limited to ecological knowledge. We just want to acknowledge that folks have many ways of describing this body of knowledge. And so and make it very clear, we don't see this as any kind of definitive term. It's just the one that we work with in this context. And so what do we say then when we mean interweaving? We use this word to describe an approach of continuous engagement that avoids the first four examples here where there's little interaction, like no interaction at all, or just interaction at the beginning and or end, and to really move towards a model of continuous engagement between the different groups working on natural resources in the Delta and beyond, and the tribes that steward this land and call it home. And so in the spirit of continuous engagement, we wanted to make sure that this event series reflected the perspectives of our tribal and tribal serving partners from the very beginning. And so as I mentioned at the top, we're very appreciative that we're able to support the participation of the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians and the California Indian Environmental Alliance in the planning of this, and really thank them for all of their leadership in developing the agenda for today and the rest of the series. Briefly, I do want to touch on a few different initiatives that have gone on at the council to just highlight how, again, this is not a one-off event, it is a longer process. And so in 2023, we hosted the first tribal listening session for council members featuring the Buena Vista Rancheria of Miwok Indians, Shingle Springs, and the Indigenous Futures Society. And this helped council members and staff learn directly from tribes and tribal serving organizations, and in many ways set the stage for what we're doing today. This listening was related to our tribal and environmental justice issue paper published in 2025, which forms the basis of how the council and staff approach both tribal and environmental justice in our work and can be found on our website. This then set the stage for a peer-reviewed publication published last year by Dr. Shoko Shinbrat and a white paper that's currently in development on interweaving and how state agencies in particular can better advance interweaving in their work. And this includes interviews with tribes that were conducted in partnership with the Buena Vista Rancheria of Miwok Indians. Stewardship Council staff also facilitates the Bay Delta Science Conference, which in 2024 featured a plenary presentation from Dr. Don Hankins and multiple panels featuring representatives of tribes and tribal serving organizations. This year's program is still being developed, but it will feature a plenary address from Chief Sisk from the Winnemem-Wintu tribe. And I will just highlight that late-breaking posters are still being accepted for the next month and a half, and registration will open soon. So if you have any projects, especially along the lines of interweaving, that would be worth sharing, we really do encourage you to put in an abstract. The Delta Stewardship Council and the Delta Science Program specifically also leads the development of the Delta Science Plan. And we wanted to highlight that the 2026 edition will be released in August, and it's organized around 4 grand challenges to science in the Delta, which includes Grand Challenge 4, other ways of knowing, especially traditional knowledge, remain siloed from decision making. The science plan sets a shared framework for conducting, coordinating, and communicating science in the Delta to foster better integration, and specifically acknowledging traditional knowledge really helps us orient it around it being a robust source of best available science as it relates to the broader management of the broader Delta system. And so if you're interested in getting involved with this, you can please feel free to scan the QR code here and learn more. So the Delta Science program also facilitates the Delta Research Awards, which are competitive science awards that are informed by the Delta Science Plan that I mentioned in the last slide. The 2025 call actually prioritized outreach to tribes and community-based organizations to expand participation and align with the Council's equity goals. A tribal interest survey was distributed to identify priority topic areas before the call went out, and also help identify potential project leads through dedicated workshops and webinars that were hosted to provide guidance on the solicitation process and related documents. So knowing that capacity building can be an issue with some of our bureaucratic processes, we're doing our best to help facilitate navigating these structures. So over $3 million of this research funding went to projects with some relationship or primary relationship to traditional knowledge. And then recently, something that I really enjoyed participating in 2 weeks ago, we have also partnered with Shingle Springs on our Science for Communities event series. And so myself and a few of us other staff were here with Jack Chigone, who is on our planning committee and with us here today. So up on Shingle Springs land, working with the community there, doing some planting, and also bringing other state agencies to help message some of their work actually for the tribal community. So, so again, this is not an exhaustive list, but we did just really want to situate what we're doing today in the broader picture. And so we acknowledge that these efforts are just a start, but we're glad to be able to share some of our progress. And so now to help us place this in a broader context and help us get oriented around the bigger picture surrounding traditional knowledge, I'm honored to introduce Brian Wallace. Brian is an Indigenous leader and Chief Executive Officer of the Indigenous Futures Society, where he guides efforts to integrate Indigenous knowledge, governance, and ecological restoration across the Sierra Nevada. He served as an elected official of the Washoe Tribe of Nevada and California from 1979 to 2006, including 4 terms as tribal chairman, and played a key role in advancing tribal sovereignty, protecting sacred sites, and supporting environmental restoration initiatives in the Lake Tahoe region. Brian has advised the U.S. Congress and served on multiple federal advisory boards, and his leadership has helped establish tribal environmental programs, cultural institutions, and collaborative restoration efforts. So I'll just note before we officially welcome Brian in with some applause, we are running a little bit behind because of getting a later start due to what's going on downstairs, and we'll just adjust our program accordingly, and we'll probably just cut a little bit into our lunchtime, but we're also providing lunch, so just grab the lunch time. So will you join me, please, in welcoming Brian Wallace?
Thank you, Dylan, and Julie, and most particularly Melissa. Thank you so much for the invitation. I first should start out in acknowledging your efforts here to center Indigenous governance and sovereignty, and I just want to state what a pleasure and an honor it is to be able to work with Vice Chair Tayaba and their community And it is just an honor to be able to collaborate with a group of people and a community and a nation that cares so much. And so we really appreciate how we're centering this series and this dialogue as we move forward. Wenam Odawi Nisanan Kawi, Hede Nisanan Kawi, Nisanan Nimni, Albert Brian Wallace, Yapami, Upule, where I'm from in my Auburn, my dad's side on Nisanan, and from Demomo, Ite, and Dila Ite, in the Martis Valley and Olympic Valley areas where my mother's blood. And so I just kind of wanted to say that to kind of ground that, we're just not actually a casual visitor here, is that like Melissa, I'm genetically related to these watersheds, and the water that courses through and by this building and then empowers this place, it was generated through the hands and caring and the understanding of Indigenous people over millennia of care and connection. And so it's just a privilege to be able to, at least in some ways, kind of represent what that means and how powerful it is for us to really understand the need to allow Indigenous communities and their knowledge to be centered and to kind of lead these movements in a real way, a real material way, with authority and support, and resources as well. And so just kind of want to cover that a little bit. But then also just ground who we are. And I want to thank Ariel and Nina and Derek here that are with me, helping me put together this nice little slideshow. It just kind of reminds me of the fun it is that we have in doing the work that we're involved in. My job here, I think, is not here to represent the past, is more to serve as representing a continuity of a governance system and a knowledge system and in a relationship with this land that's never stopped operating, even though it was suppressed for a long time. And still, in a way, we're dealing with some of the outcomes of these policies and structures that are still getting in our way of obtaining these goals of real relational work with communities that are now here with us, but also the communities that never left. I also want to say how proud I am to be here with people, Native folks that are here with us today, and recognize Anacita and some of the others here. But most particularly the young man here, because in a way, if I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to share knowledge and messages, I'd be talking to this young man in a way that he would understand and be able to carry something away from this gathering and embrace it in his own little power. And it kind of reminds me about how Native people translate information. And some people say, well, why do you guys use animals and symbols and all that? And then the idea is that for us, that's how we are able to conceptualize large concepts and big numbers. And so when we share these stories and these relationships and tell this wisdom that comes from the land and our more than human relatives that are our greatest teachers, we use these kind of stories and metaphors because children remember them and adults maintain them, and most particularly masters, they continue to decipher this information as we move forward. And so I just kind of acknowledge that young man in this room, and he's probably the most important person that I would like to be talking to as we move forward, because it's his hands and his feet that are going to be making the changes that we're looking forward to and talking about today. We were here to set the stage for this series that's coming, but also because of my relationship with these headwaters, we want to talk about headwater accountability, and that water flows downstream, and so does governance failure. So to introduce the Sierra Nevada headwaters as nations, as the original governance structures, is something that I kind of want to leave behind and make sure that we understand that sovereignty flows downstream, and so does accountability. And we're not just like upstream stakeholders, but sovereign managers of systems that make downstream California possible, quite frankly. And so it's tremendously important that you incorporate and recognize the sovereign nations that had managed these headwaters and continue to have a presence in them and work and struggle today. And again, just highlighting the upstream integration and decision making that includes these headwater nations even today that produce downstream harm, and a pattern is structural to plan at first and then consult second. So what we need to do, and what we talked about, what Dylan was talking about, was just reversing that in order, and then build relationship first and ask for data second in a way. And then I wanted to talk about, building in an ethical space of sovereignty, a place where that's rooted in truth and openness, where we can discuss and contemplate the technologies of care and survival that are going to serve all of us, and particularly the young man sitting over here in the corner. And then centering tribal on understanding that biodiversity that makes California ecosystems worth managing was produced by indigenous governance over millennia. So in the end, what we want to ask the room here is what produced, what would a world look like when the governance is restored and not consulted, and try and imagine where would we be then. So again, I just wanted to thank, for allowing me to kind of open and center where I'm from. But also I wanted to kind of add to the interweaving context of what we're talking about, because sometimes from where we're standing and some of the other people in the room were standing, is that it was not necessarily a divergence that had happened in a way. It was actual suppression. And I think that distinction changes everything about how we approach this room and how we move forward and how we address these issues honestly. We kind of want to start, but I'm going to first move into kind of build some relational ground and talk about what Indigenous knowledge actually is. But I can probably start, with actually what it's not. It's not a data set. It's a living, sovereign governance system embedded in language and in ceremony and place and ecology and relationship, not only with each other, but with all our other relatives that we share this place with, the plant family and our animal family and the rock family and the water family as well. It's not supplemental to Western science. It's an independent epistemology with its own methodology and intergenerational peer review process that actually the temporal length of it is generational, and so our peer review goes way back, and so the R&D behind our science and our knowledge is thousands and thousands of years old, if you want to kind of look at it that way. And it's not static, it's adaptive, it's relational, it's place-based, and it changes because the land changes, and if it lives because it's in relationship. And I know in our work and with our team, they struggle because in our movement, the language that we're using kind of changes as it evolves, as does the culture and the relationships that we have. And so it's not about trying to find perfect language. It's about more about being in right relationship, I think, more than anything else. And I just always kind of got to remember to share that, as we keep changing these terms and our concepts. The Sierra Nevada for us is a living, as Malissa, the vice chair, had pointed out, these systems are sacred environments. And for us, the Sierra Nevada is a living system. We kind of look at our partnership topography, how we look in our work, it's kind of watershed based, but when you kind of step out a little bit, there's basically 4 primary corridors that course over the Sierra Nevada that we kind of recognize that have trade relationships and water relationships and cultural relationships over time that are still being maintained but need to be strengthened and networked. And so that's kind of how we look at, Nisenan homeland accesses or Washoe sovereign arcs or Numapoya or Painado accesses, down in the Owens Valley area, or Monopian arc. These aren't just routes, they're governance structures, they're ecological networks and monitoring systems, they're knowledge systems. And basically they're a generational or intergenerational knowledge, honestly, a knowledge infrastructure, I guess, if that makes sense. The Sierra bioregion, of course, as everybody recognizes, one of the most biologically diverse spots on the planet, and that's because of the care and integration and governance of indigenous peoples. And it never was, and it's not a wilderness. You know, it's not an accident. I mean, it was intentional, I guess. And so I think we touched on that early on and kind of beat up on that and explained it over. But the knowledge that produced that biodiversity did not disappear in 1849. It was suppressed, and there's a critical difference between those two things. And it's kind of something that we continue to want to make sure that's resting in this room as we move along and talk about moving forward. Upstream nations as original water governors, the headwater nations, were not just stakeholders, they're original governance authorities in these systems that make downstream things happen. So, and I mentioned that every reservoir, every hydraulic facility, every agricultural right in the Central Valley has its origin in water that the Nisenan, Washoe, and Miwok people governed for thousands of years before a dam was built. And that accountability does flow downstream, not just ecologically, but in terms of governance obligations. So as this Delta Stewardship Council kind of recognizes and manages water outcomes at the end of this system, its accountability relationships to the nations upstream is not, is something that also recognizes the beginning of the system as well. The council's governing the endpoint of a hydrologic system and headwaters. So that's a relationship, that goes way, way back. And as Dylan talked about, the centering of indigenous knowledge and governance in these depressions is quite important. One of the things that we've done also with IFS is begin to kind of, how can we make visible and legible what the compounding results of indigenous or water governance or land management or conservation and the kind of returns that it gives back to us that contemporary systems or structures or institutions aren't necessarily built to measure or see just yet. And so one of the things we are working on is trying to come up with an accounting framework or a way to make visible the relational compounded returns that come back from indigenous stewardship and what indigenous knowledge actually measures. Like Western science, measures outputs and species counts and water quality indices and carbon sequestration. But indigenous knowledge measures relationships and the health of the relationship between water and land, between people and fire, and between language and place. So we have to develop kind of an accounting framework that can quantify relational health alongside ecological health. And because we just can't restore an ecosystem while ignoring the governance relationships that created it from the very beginning. And I kind of want to make sure that I leave and that rests with this group is that we really have to restore the governance system that was originally here and the accountability nature that it engenders for us to really move forward. And as long as we continue to do that, we're just kind of biting around at the fringes, and Native people are kind of asked and treated as supplemental information or supplemental sources of knowledge, and not necessarily centered, wisdom that guides us forward. So I just kind of wanted to make sure I touched on that. How am I doing on time? Good. One of the things we wanted to talk about was historical accountability, and really name, what's been going on and what's happening and what echoes into our communities today. And it's not necessarily because of a grievance. It's just something that preconditioned for genuine collaboration moving forward. California Indian genocide was real. The first state-funded genocide in North American history. It was not a metaphor. It's documented. It was legislated and it was funded in state policy. I mean, I don't know how many of you have seen these, but you've seen, these bonds that were issued by the state of California for in expeditions against Indians. And you can go in some places around here and see ones that were actually cashed in. And so it was financed. State structured. The boarding school systems was a deliberate separation of children from language, from ceremony, and knowledge transmission. And it was with the explicit goal, I think, to eliminate the systems that carried indigenous knowledge forward. the water theft that we all talk about, the dispossession of water rights that form the foundation of the Sacramento Valley agricultural economy, and the hydroelectric infrastructure that Towers is building today. I know when we talk about like the non-ratification of some of the treaties here in California, you can draw a direct through line to the growth of agrarian wealth here in California, which really is pretty much behind the energy of what brings us to these rooms in here today. So they're related to indigenous water assets that are playing out into these futures. And then the knowledge systems that the series wants to intervene are the systems of that suppression and the survivors of that suppression, and they deserve to be received as such and not as just quaint additions to a scientific canon, moving forward. One of the things I was asked to talk about is consulting a community member is not consulting a tribe. This is the panel takeaway number 1, but it belongs in my keynote framing because everything that follows is important. That a community member is an individual of a tribe, but a tribe is a sovereign governmental entity with its own government's authority, decision-making processes, and right to speak on behalf of its own nation. Agencies have systematically conflated the two because speaking to a community member is easier, faster, and less likely to result in a no. But a no from a sovereign tribal government is not an obstacle. It's a governance decision, and it deserves the same respect as a no from a county government or a state government or some other institution. And then 2 more points here is like consultation after the plan is design is not consultation, and we talked about that earlier in one of these panels. And that's panel takeaway number 2, named here as structural failure that makes takeaway 1 even worse. NEPA, the National Historic Preservation Act, CEQA consultation requirements are designated or designed to document tribal concerns, but not to shape project decisions. The plan's designed, the environmental review is filed, and the tribes are contacted after the fact. So it's basically what's called, we call it just procedural consultation, even though it's legally defensible, but it's kind of relationally bankrupt and economically insufficient. And I would even add epistemically probably misaligned and strategically suboptimal as well. But we'll move on and talk about what we can do moving forward. And sometimes I need to kind of point this out, that consultation sometimes is even seen kind of as a partial repair. And then another thing that for us is, I want to move past this, and I don't want to get off road here too much, but recently was contacted by the New Yorker magazine, and they wanted to do an article in relation to America's 250th celebration. And so the discussion that they wanted to have about was this concept of a gold rush 2.0. And what they were talking about was people that are coming up into the gold rush, into these headwaters, into these systems again, that are engaging in prospecting and gold mining and as recreational activities, or in some ways now with the price of ore, exceeding into the thousands of dollars per ounce, looking for some economic relief. So this whole discussion was about, and we spent a lot of time talking to them about, and why they got a hold of me was, what was the impact, or what's your impression as a Native person about this new gold rush, and so we had to spend a lot of time talking about what, the impact and the realities of the past gold rush that even echoes into our lives today, and particularly in this question of watershed wealth or water quality. And it was just striking to have to address that again, because, of course, getting into the old tailings is environmentally hazardous. It's not very good for habitats and fisheries and other things that we're trying to restore and bring back. But what's really struck me is that it's a lot of people. It's like a movement that I never even understood existed. But they're using like public access databases and LiDAR mapping that was used to describe fire incidents or fire zones or places that have been scarred and need restoration. So they're using these new technologies to go find places that are opened up and begin mining again. And so it's just kind of like a whole nother an activity that we kind of need to kind of be aware of and consider its impact. So I just kind of wanted to talk about, the Gold Rush 2.0 and the continuity of that extractive logic still continues even into today, and people look to nature as a place to find value and take it to market, in a straight line, and don't really understand the regenerational relationships that have to occur for even for this water to be pure or that gold to even happen in the first place. But in talking moving forward, I wanted to talk about what we're doing here, and moving forward is creating this ethical space of openness that's rooted in truth and openness, where one science tradition doesn't dominate the other, or you don't need one to validate the other, but it's a place where people can come and even admit that they don't have knowledge, but also recognize that the other party has knowledge that they don't have, or they have abilities that they don't have, and really acknowledge that. And I was reminded of a saying that someone said the other day, or I seen it somewhere, is that, anybody that can't change their mind will never change anything. And so, I mean, if you come into that kind of, with that spirit, into a room of consultation and open collaboration, I think we'll get a lot further. But the idea is to recognize the tribal communities as equal peers, if not holders of knowledge that no one has access to, that has been generated for thousands and thousands of years. And so you're talking to a representative of a time that exists then, today, and into the future. So it's a special relationship that I think really needs to be respected and honored. And so I would just like to ask you to remember that as you move forward in centering tribal perspectives, and which is primary. The ecosystems that we're trying to manage were most healthiest and most biodiverse in the state when tribal nations were governing them. And what would California's water systems look like if tribal understanding of those systems was not a data point or a resource management plan, but a primary organizing framework? And so when we ask that kind of question, there's a couple of projects that we're involved in. I think they're flashing on some of these screens. Is Miwok, where we're looking at acquiring into tribal hands, 4,200 acres of watershed here in Placer County, to create an idea of an ecocultural restoration lab and food sovereignty campus that's being governed by many hands of nations here in this area, but Nisenan governed, but also partnered with Miwok and other groups from the foothills and the headwaters. But also, we're also involved in a project with the Nature Conservancy called Up at Independence Lake, where we were tasked to do a meadow vulnerability study, which in applying our science, we turned in kind of to a relational medicine camp and model, where we worked in restoring the knowledge bearers and the practitioners' relationships with these meadows and their healing properties, not just looking at them as discrete resource assets to be managed, but more about relationships to be restored and maintained in a long-term way, and also reconnect with the other relatives that we have that are using those meadows, the Lahat and cutthroat trout that benefit from the water that comes from those seeps and the water that the meadows create, but also the black bears that share and manage those medicine populations with us as well. So I just wanted to kind of highlight the importance of, giving Native people, like Vice Chair Malissa Tayaba was talking about, actual places where this can actually happen and take root and watch and connect in a real way, and create these kind of places where it's dominated like indigenous protected and conserved areas, and maybe come up with a new designation of use and partnership for this kind of work that we're talking about moving forward. And then really center the intention of what's happening there. It's indigenous, protected, and it's governed. It's governed by tradition and knowledge and relationship, rather than by quantity and fixed terms and outputs. And so I guess one of the things I also wanted to begin to kind of wrap this up with is, talking about, I was asked to cover the issue of the free, prior, and informed consent nature of working with indigenous communities. Again, it's about respecting their knowledge, their place in these watersheds. So it's not by default. You have to kind of create a relationship first and really put time into it. I mean, in the end, it's about understanding, what does it mean to be a guest in someone else's knowledge system in a way. For the agency and the scientific participants in the room, in a way, you're guests of an indigenous knowledge system, and I said not partners by default. So it's the work to kind of build these relationships first. Partnership is earned through demonstrated accountability and sustained relationship and willingness to cede authority when tribal sovereignty requires it. And that's probably one of the most important things I can say, is that there got to become a time when the tribal people be back in charge again, and begin to kind of really center their authority and this wisdom and really let them be free these communities up to do the work that they've been able to do for thousands of years that brings us here today, and begin to kind of reach back and protect the source of this biodiversity rather than its outputs. Let's go back and what created the biodiversity in the first place is kind of where we need to focus. So with saying that, I just wanted to make sure I kind of covered all this stuff. I was telling Nina I really made a mistake. I was looking at my notes and then I found some other notes, so I'm trying to put two different notes together. And so it never works when you try and do that. But I just wanted to lead with a few things here about what participants in this room can do starting today. First of all, I think what we talked about is to stop asking for indigenous knowledge before you invest in the relationship that makes sharing possible. Relationship first, data later. Learn the difference between consultation and consent, and audit your own agency's processes honestly against that distinction. And then when a nation says no to a project or a data request or a collaboration, receive that no as a governance decision and not an obstacle. Sovereignty includes the right to decline. And then I think I'll offer a few more takeaways here with regards to consultation and I guess the upcoming importance of the panel to follow here is that consulting a tribal member is not the same as meaningful consultation. The other takeaway is that tribal consultation needs to occur before developing or designing a plan, not after the funding is committed and the design is scoped. The third takeaway is relationship building is foundational, and it's not a preliminary step. It is the process. Trust is a prerequisite for collaboration. It's an outcome of it, built through years of showing up, making mistakes, and repairing them, and following through. And then the last two is free, prior, and informed consent under UNDRIP is the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is a governing framework, and any interweaving or any bypassing that is just call it what it is, and it's not collaboration. And that traditional knowledge is situated in place, and that tech defined differently by different agencies and different tribes is something that's kind of a reality. Each tribe has its own perspective, its own relationships with these places. So you're not going to find a universal truth or a universal culture or a universal language or universal technologies of how tribes, resolve and move forward in these worlds and in these times. So I just want to take the time to thank you. I don't know if I'm running over my time or okay. But I just wanted to highlight too, kind of what we're going to be hearing about from these panelists is not a list of tips working with tribes. It's the living testimony of people who have navigated a system that was not built for them and have kept showing up anyways. So I just want to ask you to receive their do's and don'ts, not as compliance guidance, but as an invitation to build something different. Really, the question is not how to engage tribes better in the current system. The question is whether you are willing to be part of building something different and something, a system that works. And so to me, that's what I think this whole series is about. And I really appreciate the opportunity to even be a part of getting this started. And it's been a while since I've had to do keynotes. And so I appreciate your patience for allowing me to kind of ramble along and get a little off track here a little bit. And also I want to give myself some props because I had a hip replacement not that long ago and hadn't been stood up here this long in a long time. So that's a new goal. And so I just want to thank everybody for being here. And I know there's so much more to talk about rather than just reading from notes. And it's more about, sitting here and doing the work together and really respecting each other. But I really want you to hope that to really appreciate what can happen if you allow Indigenous people to lean into their own power and to really breathe life into these relationships, into these histories, and to these understandings, because not only will we help lift this nation to a higher and better place and our own nations, but this whole nation, and begin to kind of create a world for this young man where he can grow up with an understanding of a way of life in the open, and that he can be raised with a fighting heart. And I know his parents there, are already teaching him, the beauty of giving and sharing what you value most. And hopefully soon he'll be able to taste the happiness of giving and sharing as well. And we can begin to find the ability and the room to teach our children, the beauty of generosity and what it means to live in a world, or to be raised in a world where every face has a right to kisses, whether you're native or non-native or more than human or human. You have a tail or some scales or some fur. We're all in it together, and I just wanted to let you recognize that. And I need to speak on behalf of those relatives, because they're not here today, but we're here on their behalf, and most particularly the places that they value. Because in the end, I think the work that we're trying to do is, tonight, human and non-human mothers are going to go to bed looking for a place of security and hoping for refuge so they can continue the sacred work of raising the next generation. And so to me and to our team, I always kind of want to remind ourselves is, what are we doing to give these mothers hope for the future? So with that, I just want to thank you for this time and this opportunity to kind of share these thoughts with you. So appreciate it. Thanks. Oh. Yeah, sure. I hope I made sense.
So we do have time for a few questions. If you're interested in asking a question in the room, please raise your hand, and we'll, if you can just wait till we get the mic runner over to you so that folks online can hear you. And then if you're online, if we have time, you can feel free to use the question and answer function.
Thank you. Beautiful. I just want to also thank Nina and Ariel and Derek that are here with me. Their help.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation, for your discussion. Talk about relationships. And I wanted to hear your thoughts about the paradigm relationship between tribal thought of multi-generational projects, where you have governance that looks at projects in terms of 20, 25, 50 years. How do you make that work?
I tried touching on it earlier when we were trying to come up with a framework of how you can make that not necessarily monetize the relationship, but how to make it legible and visible to something that we know, but to partners. Because as you're kind of touching on, a lot of the work that we're involved in is trying to find the language that allows the value of what we know to be appreciated and respected and measured and resourced mostly by agencies that we're working with, and they're operating on the boundaries of their own imaginations. So, you know, you kind of got to keep going and going and going. I kind of come across this when we look at how do we resource our movement, you know, and create like sovereign, how do we maintain our coherence as we move forward as Native people and avoid all of these fragmentation traps and black holes. And what I'm talking about is being separated from our culture, being separated from language, being separated from each other. Language from land, and relatives from relatives, meaning, you know, more than human and non-human, those relatives being separated from their watersheds, and all these sources of accountability that kept us together, these relational networks, this relational geometry that you're kind of touching on. And so the idea is to kind of point that out and try and describe what that really means. So we've been fiddling with this kind of what we call relational returns, kind of accounting framework, for lack of a better term, to try and make visible the compounded returns, relational returns from Indigenous peoples having their hands in or on the land. And it's not just like ecological returns or commercial returns. There's ceremonial. There's when you put fire back on there, you begin to kind of chart that. When you're getting elders and young people on the land, and you're talking about engaging into a temporal exchange of knowledge, that if you're able to kind of put it into like an investment structure, it's nations across generations. I mean, where do you find that kind of commitment to purpose? You're not going to see that in a carbon return, you know, fixed kind of math structure. But what you're kind of touching on is how can we really make visible, or in the end, describe what we count as real change, or, you know, what do we describe in this context as real value, you know, and not necessarily, you know, a monetary one or a certain kind of scientific data point or something like that, but really for us as Native people, what does really count and what doesn't. And so to me, like creating this relational understanding about how all this is working together is just this thing we're trying to put our hands on right now. And I hope I'm trying to describe this, you know, or answer your question better. But and then you can take that unit or whatever you want to call it, and then kind of create it as a ratio to show a differential against other ways that people are managing resources. And if you take like how the state of California is investing in managing its own, you know, infrastructure-based management system, and you can kind of see its values declining over time, even though there's a powerful more investment, just the structure itself is failing because it was designed for something that doesn't exist anymore. And so what we're trying to say is that relational context and that knowledge is more durable. It's more lasting. And like you're talking about, it's durable across generations. And so we're talking about generational rates of return at that point, you know, that are feeding back into the community, feeding back into the watershed, feeding back into the relationships of us and these species. And so that's the kind of accounting math that we're involved in right now, to try and make that legible, not only for ourselves to do better work and be more meaningful work, but also to speak to these institutions that are resourcing so many other big efforts in so many big ways, but they're not really making any change or any difference. And all we're saying is that we have a better deal, you know, we'll show you some better math that, you know, that of something that exists already, that's there. We just got to recognize it and let it breathe and let it happen again. And then please protect it and protect the people that are doing this. Sorry, I hope that answered your question. Sure.
A quick follow-up question to that online from Sydney Moss. As you're thinking through this relational accounting, have you thought about how these frameworks could remain place-based and subjective?
Well, they're going to be different, you know, because the relationships of each community, you know, if we're doing this kind of in a watershed context, or, you know, kind of a smaller geographic kind of you're going to be dependent on the source of the knowledge in the first place, you know, and where that's coming from, and the lens that's looking at these, you know. So there's sovereign perspectives that'll be recognizable only to the ones that speak it in a way. I mean, you know, what truths work in a watershed here on the west side is different in Miwok country, you know, where you're dealing with alkaline meadows and east, you know, a Great Basin type watershed, where here on the Pacific side things are a little different. It's all about the authors of the knowledge, and then that is a real trick. He's talking about is, you know, how do you avoid, you know, getting into a monetizing, unitizing kind of perspective that then kind of feeds right into the extractive economy and the extractive looks about how these other solutions of carbon credits and offsets that are kind of just continuing extractive kind of practices anyways. And so the idea is to kind of come up with our own creative kind of sovereign coherence financial structures, or, you know, sources of you know, of our own capital, you know, that's where, you know, tribal people aren't the beneficiary or the stakeholder in it. They're actually the equity holders, you know. And so in a way, if we can come up with this kind of math, for lack of a better term, or framing, then we can kind of create our own bonds and our own structure to internalize our own value and build our own guardianship capital or our own relational capital that really is really old, that we're just, you know, putting, you know, I wouldn't say new clothes on something new, but I mean, you know, what we're talking about as Native people is just, you know, having the freedom to have not necessarily access, but, you know, integration into to the places, the lands that made us primarily. So wandered with that one, but tried my best.
Hi, Brian. Thanks so much for everything you said. I'm interested to hear sort of an example. Like, for example, in Lake Tahoe, there's, you know, a lot of agencies, including the state or the regional water board, that makes decisions about how much sediment can enter the lake, how much pollution can enter the lake, and look backwards to that. So say, okay, well, got to ask people to do a better job of managing stormwater, not allowing so much erosion. That's kind of the Western model governing Lake Tahoe. What would be your vision of Indigenous governance of Lake Tahoe?
Tahoe, I could pick like a place like a meadow. I mean, you know, look at what's going on in Mayalawata. Chairman Smokey will be talking in downstairs, you know, as an example, where you kind of created an indigenous kind of centered space that's protected and conserved by native hands to itself, but also in the models that we're attempting to kind of work is that we've been involved in this work called nation builders, and it's kind of was working with a particular demographic in our community, and then kind of setting them up and looking at it. Well, what are we going to be doing for building our leadership pipeline for the future? And so we'll start working with these nation builders, but it doesn't take long to recognize that they're the ones that should be running the show in the first place. We shouldn't be like creating a space for them. This is their space. And so one of the things that we decided, or we're exploring, is that we're doing land-based labs with nation builders and calling them like seed summits or summits. And we're doing this kind of watershed centric. And so we're planning one in Payonado country. We're doing one up above Georgetown, and then we're another one up in the Truckee area, where we get knowledge bearers and practitioners and our own scientists and our own tools that we use. We're beginning to use to kind of gather this information, and it's cultural in a way. It's healing information. It's in language too, as much as we can, and that's part of our logic, is doing this in language, and creating the types of nodes of information that we want them to gather. That's not just water quality or profiling or inventorying a meadow, but what are the relationships that are intact that need to be restored, and follow those trails and build those understandings again with these young people, and then use them not only as nation builders, but like our resource ecologists, our data gatherers, and so we'll build that model through their hands, and then come up with I could show you later. It's kind of like a framework of 9 relational kind of context points that we will be asking them to kind of gather information on, and then kind of build this argument and make legible, these relational returns that come from them being on the ground, doing this meadow restoration work and bringing these springs back and turning these into medicine meadows or basket making meadows or places to gather and grow. And so the idea is to these young people and these nation builders, use them or work with them as our investigators and sources of information, and then put it into this framework and then use that to kind of come up with a new map, and then to then demonstrate a differential with that particular unit, how it's better, use it to come up with almost an indigenous rate of return, for lack of a better term, and demonstrate how these returns are far superior than any other investment that's being made by any institution or conservation partner heretofore. So that's kind of the idea.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brian. That's a perfect way to close us out. So if you'll join me in a round of applause. Touching on really wide range of things that we're going to be covering over these 3 sessions, and also just they're generally important for creating this work. So we're very appreciative. Yeah, we look forward to chatting more of the breaks.
All right, yeah, thank you.
So we will be on break until 10:45. There is coffee and refreshment outside. The bathrooms are, if you keep walking down this way, on the 2nd floor. And I will just note for our remote participants, just a reminder that the chat is disabled, but if you have any questions for our panel later, you can use the Q&A function for that. So we will see you all back here in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
As you work to interweave traditional knowledge into your, as you work to interweave traditional knowledge into your work. Yeah, so with that, I would just like to invite our panelists to start making their way up to their spots here. So your names are here, so don't be shy. Come on up. And so I'll just, by way of introduction, I will just sort of read out the names, and then our moderator will sort of guide us into the first question that will structure the rest of the panel from. From sort of my right to your left, the left, we have Derek Goodwin, who's the Traditional Ecological Knowledge Program Executive at the Indigenous Futures Society. Derek's going to be our moderator today, so thank you so much, Derek, for jumping into that. We have Kimberly Stevenot, who's an elder with the Miwok tribe and brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to the panel today, although she might be shaking her head, but I'm going to disagree. We have Melissa Tayaba, Vice Chair of the Shingle Spring Band of Miwok Indians, who you heard from earlier. We have Nina Fontana from the Indigenous Futures Society and the University of California, Davis. Then we have Anacita Agustinas from the California Department of Water Resources. And then joining us online will be Michelle Rivera from the California Indian Environmental Alliance. And so today, some of our panelists will have slides, some won't, but we're really looking forward to having this conversation together. And I will turn it over to Derek to get us started.
Can you hear me? Sweet. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. And I just want to jump into our first question, which is our introduction question, which is, please describe your work and how it relates to interweaving tribal traditional knowledge. So I guess I'll start with, we'll go down the panel.
Majuxus. I'm Kimberly Stevenott, and I'm Northern Sierra Miwok. I'm a member of the California Valley Miwok tribe. Today I speak on my own, not for the tribe. I was kind of surprised that, they even invited me to do this, but they, as Brian knows, like when I start talking, it's hard for me to stop. What was the question?
The question is, please describe your work and how it relates to interweaving traditional knowledge.
Okay. I am a 5th generation documented basket weaver. I'm a founding board member of the California Basket Weavers Association. And I grew up in a generation that was learning to be Indian. My grandparents went to and survived boarding school. My parents survived boarding school. They refused to share their knowledge, their native knowledge with me, because they were afraid that I would be punished or condemned or whatever for being Indian. I grew up in San Francisco. My mother was part of the Native relocation program. And one of the things I remember was 4th grade. And the teacher would say, she'd speak about California Indians in the past tense. We weren't here. We weren't live. We're all gone. And I challenged her. I said, why are you saying that? She goes, well, why are you asking? I said, because I'm California Indian. And, I knew my mom had told me not to I wasn't supposed to tell anybody that. But I was tired of hearing people tell me that we were not here. And that's how I started advocating for California natives. I finally learned through my mother, watching my mother, I learned how to weave. Unfortunately, I didn't weave my first basket until the day or the year after she passed. We were at the first California Indian Basket Weavers gathering at Yaka'ama in Santa Rosa. And my sister was there and she had my mother's basket material. And I picked it up and I started a basket. 2 months later, I finished it. From there, I had no teachers. I did that on what I call, it's a memory. Okay, it's something that's instilled in your body, in your mind, and it's a memory of your past generations, your ancestors. And it passes through us. And that's when we're doing things out gathering, out cooking traditional foods. Nobody taught me. I did what came natural. and I still do that today. I'm an advocate for traditional foods. My sister and I and 3 other groups of sisters are, I shouldn't say are, because there's girls out there learning now, but we were the only group of Native women who still cooked in the traditional manner in baskets. In my lifetime, I became one of the first director of Indian Educations for Ceres Unified School District. And again, I instilled to my Native students that they had to learn their identity, their tribe, their traditions. We cannot base being Indian if we're going to pretend we're somebody else. And that goes into that pan-Indianism where everybody wants to go to the powwow and everybody wants to dress up in the feathers and stuff. And I'm sick and tired of hearing people tell me, well, where's your feathers? I said, we don't wear feathers. Okay? People like to group Native Americans based on pan-Indianism, based on the style of the Plains natives. California has over 250 different tribal units, and we're each individual units with our own traditions. Many of us are very basic in our beliefs and our ceremonies, but we're here in California. That's, a mountain range over from the Plains. And I'm not condemning the Plains natives, but what I'm saying is we're in California. Let's celebrate being California natives. Somebody better take over. I'm going to keep going.
Okay, I think this is on. Please describe your work and how it relates to interweaving traditional knowledge. That's a big question. For me, traditional knowledge is in every aspect of my life. Traditional knowledge is the base of how I educate my tribal members, which means that the land is really the base for teaching our children. And so my work, more than just, building traditional regalia, more than building houses and boats, it's just a part, I think, of who we are. And to say that I'm going to, do things that make me who I am sounds easy. But for me, it has been very different in my line of work because as we take our kids back to the waterways, the protection of the waterways has led me more to these square boxes than it has to the waterways, because that's how traditional knowledge, that's how I'm experiencing it as a leader of my tribe. And I've been a leader for a while now. And the work has led me to these buildings to talk about. Thank you, Anasita. Okay. The work has led me to a lot of these buildings to let agencies know that we still exist. A lot of people just don't have the basic knowledge of the tribes here in the region. So I want to first say that, traditional knowledge for me personally has been a lot of educating different groups. And I feel that base work has been important because it's kind of what has needed to happen here in this region. This region really sticks out. One, obviously I'm from here, but this is a center point for the state. And so I think for my tribe in particular and how my tribe was affected by colonialism, by Sutter in 1849, those things are important. They've been important to bring to light so that people understand who we are. And that's the first and foremost thing that has had to happen here in the last handful of years. I can teach culture and do culture, but I can't teach it without the proper setting. And so that proper setting is what my team and I have been trying to understand for the most part, but most importantly, really trying to penetrate the bubble of knowledge that tribes are here, that we exist. We've always been here and we're going to always be here. And that's how it is. And so it's been important for us to get into these rooms with agencies to talk about a tribal perspective. And so that's been my work with traditional knowledge, even though it's much more than being in these buildings, but that's been the calling. And I think that my tribe, I hope that we're doing a good job in making agencies realize that we're here to stay. It took us, 100 years to get to these tables, really, and like that's kind of how I feel, that for me personally and my tribe personally, and I grew up on the reservation. A lot of what Kimberly had talked about, parts of that is my upbringing. It hasn't been an easy path, and as Chairman Wallace stated earlier, like we're the survivors of being in a system that has not worked for us. And so we've mastered getting around the systems that were built, but we're still standing, and we still are standing to voice what our communities need, and that what we've really kind of been deprived of all these years. And it's taken 100 years for us to be able to get up on our feet and come to these tables. And so I would say that that's the work of us and my tribe right now is getting agencies to realize that we're here, that these waterways we are connected to and we have a very deep relationship with, which is really hard to explain. The spirit of the water, the spirit of the trees, that's something that is really hard to explain. But as Chairman Wallace stated earlier, it really is all about those relationships. It's about the relationship that you have, that you can feel in your soul. And so those relationships are kind of what guide me. And all of the work that I've done is really those connections that I have to these spaces. And when you go to these spaces, you can actually feel what they need. And so I think that as a tribal person, I take it very seriously that we are the voices for the ones that cannot talk. And so to be brought into spaces like this, which are very different from being on the land, it's like, how do you decipher and bring that spirit into these buildings and have people understand those relationships? because it's so important, and those are the ones that guide us to the next work that has to be done. So that is how traditional knowledge is in my life, and moving forward. I think the path of the work of traditional knowledge is very clear. And I think that's it. Thank you.
But we have it online. Sure.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Michelle Rivera. I work with the California Indian Environmental Alliance. I did put together a PowerPoint. Can you start with the next slide, please? So, we kind of wanted to talk about like interweaving do's and don'ts, but we also wanted to talk about like some benefits and challenges of interweaving. And working with the California Indian Environmental Alliance, there has been some issues that we've run into, but the benefits are just as great as and very great when we work with tribes. There's a lot of tribal knowledge that comes out when collaborating with tribes. You know, they provide information on evolution, reciprocity within traditional territories, rebalancing, including fire, water, species benefit, abundance, and diversity. Working with tribes, you can get funding diversification, and there's also an opportunity to assist tribes and provide that funding for them and help them move forward any work that they're trying to get to do. There's also co-management and land back opportunities that can come out of working with tribes and increasing their access and traditional species restoration, which is extremely important to working with tribes and really great for the ecosystem. Um, There's also tribal leadership and restoration and climate leadership, and it's really great to, be able to work with tribes and being able to hear and learn and really get to know like the issues that they go through and learn a lot from them and try to apply all of the knowledge that they share to the projects that we work on. Um, there are also some challenges to interweaving. Um, one of them being jurisdiction. There are 100 separate reservations and rancherias in California, and individual Indian trust allotments. There are state, federal, local agencies, divisions, or regions that do not align with tribes. The tribal status varies as well. There are tribes that are federally recognized, state recognized, or unrecognized, and there are a lot of unfederally recognized tribes that, struggle with working on projects or um, being involved or considered in conversations. And because, they're not federally recognized, they're oftentimes like left out. And that's a really big issue, just because they don't have a certain recognition doesn't mean that they shouldn't be there. And tribes oftentimes have capacity, like not as much as capacity as other tribes, and this kind of ties in with, unfederally recognized tribes. Tribes and tribal lands historically are underfunded and have a high workload. Um, and that's kind of like a theme that I'm kind of going to be mentioning throughout my presentation because I feel like it's such an important thing to keep on considering when working with tribes, um, and to also kind of consider. Um, when reaching out and communicating with them as well. Another issue is that not all tribes are on the NHC list. You will have to do outreach on your own. Although, you may have to take the extra step to reach out and get in contact with tribes. Um, it's it's better for you to kind of go and try to see, where you're able to find this information and keep yourself updated and ensure that you're keeping track of, who can be or who is the right person to talk to, who, making sure your contacts are up to date. We go to the next slide, please? Um, Consultation, is a very important aspect of when working with tribes. There are consultation and executive orders, but these don't apply to unfederally recognized tribes. Um, but they should be still included in either way. When having to do seek with NEPA outreach to tribes early and often, and we bolded and underlined early to emphasize that um, it's never too early to start a conversation and building relationships with tribes. Um, ensure that the contacts of tribes are up to date, and making sure that you communicate with the tribe and try to set up a timeline that works with them, because many tribal representatives still have to bring back decisions to council before they can provide conclusions and recommendation, and this takes time. And this kind of ties in, and like building that relationship ahead of time can really save a lot of stress and anxiety of having to meet a deadline. If you know that something like this will be coming up, it's better to get ahead of it and you know collaborate with the tribe and kind of talk about what timeline works for them, especially if a tribe you know, doesn't have that much capacity to participate, but they're interested in it. Just taking that extra step to communicate with tribes is um, really important and very helpful. Um, Another thing that, we recognize is that, it's important to reach out to all local tribes potentially affected by a project, regardless of recognition status. When working on projects that include water, include tribes in source and receiving water in addition to the footprint area of the project. Um, I think we know water flows through every avenue, and it's important to kind of integrate all the different areas, like the source and the receiving water, when thinking or working on projects um, that include water. And just to kind of also emphasize that tribes each speak on their own behalf, but also like be aware that there may be some shared traditional use areas. Next slide, please. We're gonna kind of do some do's and don'ts, but we'll start off with some don'ts. And a big one that we do want to emphasize is that, don't treat tribes like stakeholders. They are sovereign nations. Um, it's not a group that, you have to talk to. It's more so um, that they deserve a seat at a table. Like that seat should already be there and not like space, like they should already have a table, no matter a seat at the table, no matter what. Ensuring that you're not sharing culturally sensitive information or expect tribal participants to provide this to you. Culture, poachers, and theft are still issues. Um, and being and working with tribes and making sure that you're taking that extra step to protect that culturally sensitive information and not making it public where other people can access, those certain tools and plants and species that are very sacred to tribes, and putting them in harm's way. And again, avoiding short deadlines. Tribes need time to review materials and provide comments. To really get meaningful participation, time really needs to be allotted and there needs to be a lot of it. Uh, avoid implying what tribal staff are saying and instead get confirmation on what was captured by the note taker. Um, After every meeting, or if you're trying to put like a document together, just, contact the tribe and be like, hey, like, is this what you meant when you said this? Did we capture this correctly? Just ensuring that what was said is being conveyed correctly. And don't mistake a meeting or discussion or meeting as a consultation. Just because you have talked with tribes does not mean that the consultation is complete. Tribes have a process when it comes to consultation, and you should consult with the tribe you work with and find out their process and create a timeline that works for them. And do not take or post photos without permission from tribes, even if they invite you to tour the ground. Always ask for permission and ensuring that you're not, crossing a boundary or taking an innocent photo, but you're still like sharing too much of what is going on. Next slide, please. Some do's are no historical context. Start with understanding tribal history specific to the land and the land you are working on. Recognize tribal leadership in meeting. If possible, know who is there in advance and ask how they prefer to be addressed. Leave space for tribe-to-tribe conversations. Convene a tribal-only caucus if requested. This is something my organization does, and we try to include any tribal partners that, because agencies try to meet with tribes, one-on-one, which is great, but sometimes it's good for the tribes to meet together to kind of discuss like, what they've been hearing from the agencies, or, what's been said to them, and kind of comparing notes and seeing if like there are some discrepancies that are going on. Um, and gathering news, contact information for tribal council, administrative staff, tribal historic preservation officers, environmental department, natural resources staff, and others such as tribe recommends. Keep those contacts up to date. And it doesn't hurt to contact more than one person from that tribe to ensure that that information gets to the right person. It's better to do more outreach than less. And outreach to tribal organizations and maybe convening a group on the topic, or know which tribes are more interested in the topic. It's a good base to start from. Ask tribes from the project if they would like to host a meeting near the location of project to provide context. Um, and ask of the tribe from the meeting location if they would like to offer an opening benediction, prayer, welcome, or statement, and if they have a preferred land acknowledgement language. And then again, just to kind of reemphasize communication and coordination early and often. Um, and pay attention to cadence. Do not cut off tribal speakers, especially elders. Leave spaces in conversational flow. Step back and step forward applies. Um, that is it for my presentation, but we hope that you kind of take these do's and don'ts and kind of apply them when you're interweaving and working with tribes. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I'll pass it down to Nina.
Hi, can you hear me? Good. Good morning. My name is Nina Fontana. I'm affiliated with UC Davis, and I also work with Indigenous Futures Society. A little bit about where I'm standing. I was born in Washington, D.C., grew up in that area. I come from a really big family. My mom's from Ukraine, my dad's Italian, and I spent a lot of time going back to Ukraine, and I was able to spend my dissertation time over there and work with communities that are close to me. And it was really pivotal in sort of, I bring that up because it's pivotal to the work I do now. And, thinking about your own connection to place, where you're from, is a good place to start. And so I'm like fangirling over here because all these wonderful women are amazing leaders. And so what I'm going to share with you is not what TK is. I'm going to share with you my perspective of how working in relationships has changed the way I look at science and how that creates better science, hopefully. Done well. Oh, I can do this. Oh, cool. Okay. So how I've spent my time in California. Over the past, I would say like 5 to 10 years, I've had the privilege of working internationally and nationally with California tribal nations, indigenous nonprofits, federal agencies and state agencies to forward making useful decision support tools, thinking about cultural burning initiatives, creating practical guides, teaching tools. I spent like 5 years as a high school educator, so that tends to come out sometimes. And also working with California Indian Alatis. I know Michelle brought that up in her presentation, so we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that, as well as stewardship planning for land acquisition. So we know that California State has an initiative to get back, to give back land back close to 7 million acres, which is not an accident. That number is not an accident. That was what the state neglected in their treaties to ratify. So that's that number that you might see floating around in news stories. That's where that number comes from. So I've had the opportunity to work on some stewardship planning for land acquisition because they make you do all these crazy cultural monitoring plans and lots of documentation. So I've worked with Danny Manning, Diana Almendarez, UC Davis, Beth Rose Middleton, Ron Good, lots of folks around the state in different places and different cultures. So if you are a scientist and you've spent time in school, you tend to be taught, science begins with questions, which it does. But it really kind of starts before that, where it needs to begin with relationships and it needs to begin with invitations. So thank you for inviting me here, number one. And number two, initially I thought, okay, my job is to, do really good science and, look at landscapes. But I learned that my first responsibility really is to build relationships. So today, what I want to share is not just what I've had the privilege of working on, but what changed because of it. So what changed is where the work begins. It doesn't begin with the questions necessarily. It begins with the people that you're working with. So I won't have any time to go through the really important history of California Indian allotments. What I will say is that they are individually held parcels of land that were distributed to Native people across California and actually across the US as well, under federal allotment policies in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And they were created through a very painful and deliberate history of dispossession and genocide, but they remain really important family homelands where cultural practices, gatherings, stewardship, and relationships to place continue today. So I've had the privilege of being part of a bigger project with UC Davis, that asks how can we support Native-led stewardship on these lands. So when we began this project, we approached allotments, and I was working with a group of ecologists the way ecologists approach things, which is, we wanted to understand vegetation, we wanted to understand fire risk, we wanted to understand climate vulnerability, and those are good questions. It's not to say that they're not good questions, they're very good questions, but they aren't the only questions. And so what changed was the questions themselves. And so when we think about the word interweaving, it's not about adding, in my opinion, Indigenous knowledge. It's about changing the questions altogether. So some of the photos here are photos of allotments. Julie Tex is a basket weaver, and we went out onto her allotment, onto her family land, and we looked at different plants, right? We looked at water, we did all the things that you're supposed to do, but we also took a pause. And the way we approached walking, I know it sounds funny, was different. The pace changed. One of the biggest lessons that you can learn is actually not in a meeting, which meetings are important. I'm very happy to be here. But it can happen when you're actually on the land, when you're walking with people. And sometimes as scientists, we're trained to move differently. Like we got to go to a location and sample, or, we have data to collect, or we have these objectives we got to accomplish, which are valid. But when you are walking with someone, you might see an ecological observation, but you might hear a cultural teaching or a memory. And so when you're understanding a landscape, it's not just about covering distance, it's about paying attention. So here we went to, we visited, I don't even know how many, maybe 40 allotments over the course of our time. And there were allotments where, there was a road that you were supposed to use to get there, but it was blown out. So it becomes an issue of access. If you're a family wanting to go to your land and this road is blown out, and it's been blown out because of a fire and the U.S. Forest Service hasn't repaired it, it becomes a bigger issue, right? Access isn't just about getting somewhere. For these allottees, it's about continuity of care for the land. And so this project sort of reminded me of another responsibility when we think about what we're looking for and what we're measuring. And we should be thinking about measuring the things that matter most to the communities we're hoping to support. So here's some new questions through our conversations. So of course, what vegetation is here? What is the fire risk? What are future climate impacts? But we also had these other questions, which is, can my grandkids safely get there? That's an access issue, but it's also like a community safety issue. If there's a fire, the evac routes. Are the plants my grandmother or, relatives, are they still there? Are those plants still there? Okay, yeah, that's a relationship question, but it also gets to what's happened there. Was there a fire? Was there flooding? What's the habitat, right? You're getting those ecological questions answered, but you're also understanding the relationship, which is really, really key. And then, will this spring still have water in 20 years? That's like climate modeling, right? Like there's a lot there in these questions that are both cultural and ecological. And so these questions actually have real management implications too, more so than the other ones, if you think about it. So this kind of gets to Brian's initial, his amazing keynote where he talked about accounting. And it sort of got me thinking a little bit of, this one column is, what ecologists often measure. But being out with folks and talking to them and understanding what maybe we need to remeasure or think about measuring in the poor way that we know how to do that as scientists, right? You know, access for families and elders. How do we account for that? Availability of plants or mushrooms or waterways. What do the opportunities for gathering look like? What's the reliability of these plants? Can they come back every year, or are they being choked out by encroaching trees or whatever? What's the capacity for ongoing stewardship? Well, if they can't get there, you know, what does it actually look like? And then thinking about those relationships between people and place. So this was a turning point for me, just because they fundamentally changed how we thought about stewardship. And the ecological condition is a part of that story. But there's so much more depth in these types of questions. So we came up, we worked with the California Public Domain Allottee Association, which is a Native nonprofit with allottees being the board. And we worked with, you know, climate modeling teams at UC Davis, and we came up with a rubric. And of course, it's not great, because how can it be great? You're trying to take relationship and like condense it into a box. So it's going to be faulty, but it gets to those questions a little bit. And so I just wanted to share that, you know, what changed was the indicators. You know, can you get to an allotment? How comfortable are you when you're there? Is there a reason to be there? Meaning, you know, is there water or culturally important species? And are there other concerns? So this is something that I just wanted to share, like an example of what interweaving can look like. So, you know, over the past 5+ years, I realized that none of these projects changed in just one way. They changed in the types of questions we asked. They changed what we considered important enough to measure. They changed the pace of the work, teaching that slowing down isn't an obstacle to good science. It's a prerequisite for understanding. It changed how you define success. It's not a report. It's not just a report or a publication or a completed grant. It's whether those relationships are stronger, whether communities have greater capacity to care for their lands, and whether people want to continue working together after the project ends. And the biggest change wasn't in the projects, it was in me. And so I invite you, which was another point Brian made, is our ability to change how we see things. I think that's really critical. Yeah, it's just something we practice in relationships. And if we allow relationships to change us, it won't just lead to better partnerships, they'll lead to better science. Thank you.
Yate Bene. My name is Anasita Augustinus. I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation. Such an honor to be here. I really want to thank, you know, the planners for putting this program together. I know we're just the kickoff, and I think Melissa and your team and Brian and Dylan and the Delta Stewardship Council, if this is any indication of the interest, I just think that the interest will grow for the next 2 sessions. And I know having the opportunity for that Zoom is really, really a great way to really get the message out to the communities. And so, as I mentioned, I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. My traditional clans are Twitty-Jitney, which means on my mother's side, which means bitter water. And on my father's side, and my patrilineal clan on my father's side, I'm born for Ilocano. So I happen to be one of the unique Indo-Pinos or Navapinos that I'm meeting more and more of throughout the state, not only in California, but up and down the coast. And so it brings an awareness of tradition And when I was asked to speak, and it was entitled Interweaving, I thought that was really a great title because I am from a family of weavers. There are basket makers, and as a basketry is a real strong tradition of the Navajo Nation, but my family from the western portion of Navajo are weavers. And when I look at, my role, I think today is sort of interweaving, what as a traditional Navajo woman working in state policy, and to quote just from this morning, that I am aware of being a guest in another's knowledge system. I have that unique job and that unique responsibility of working on water issues for the state of California at the Department of Water Resources, but speaking for California tribes. I would never presume to speak for California tribes, but I would say advocating those tribal interests. And I think that many tribal liaisons and colleagues that I see in the room, you also have that unique framework. And I heard earlier from, Honorable Kimberly and Honorable Malissa, about who has been at the table and how has a table been set. And I think that, we're very cognizant of that. And we're in a unique time in state policy where under the last two administrations, executive orders and other state policies have really put, and also state legislation, have really underscored traditional ecological knowledge as being mandatory in state water planning processes and other water management and other natural resources and environmental processes. So it's not going away. It's going to continue to grow. It's going to be a responsibility for anyone that works in state and works with tribes and wants to ensure those relationships and how we build that. I think the foundation is really strong. There are many nonprofits that are working in this space. With that understanding also, yes, I heard earlier, communities do not speak for tribes, but understanding how then do we put in this interweaving, this knowledge under data sovereignty principles. And so, and also, and to speak in the context of Western language and academia, what is intellectual property rights? As we talk to tribes about the sacred knowledge, because we are then, once it's shared, and Nina, you mentioned being on the land and the wonderful pictures that Brian shared of that relationship, many stories are shared. That's the oral tradition of the stories. Sometimes those stories just come to us and they're not, you had that privilege of being in the earshot of those stories. Now you have that responsibility because that story has been shared with you. That story now has pierced your heart. That story now runs through you like the water and the blood in your veins. And when I just treasure any time and opportunity that I can share a sunset or a sunrise with a fellow tribal member or a fellow, working colleague, that we can share those stories and understand how sacred it is to have that knowledge and what that responsibility is. And so those are the types of things and the knowledge that I try to bring to my work. And I wanted to also share that when it talked about a little bit about the homework that we were given about the do's and don'ts and what we do. And as you know, at the Department of Water Resources, we have a really grand responsibility of managing, the largest in the nation state water project. We also have the incredible responsibility of historical legacy of destroying many homelands of tribal citizens and tribal governments throughout the state in the interest of advancing water policy, in the interest of advancing California's economic prosperity. And that is what a legacy of understanding what are your historical actions as a state agency or as any other governmental entity or any other business. What is your accountability to what has brought you here today as a manager of any type of environmental resources? Are you beyond a land acknowledgement, acknowledging what has put you and made us the fourth largest economy? And what are the responsibilities to maintain that? And did we even get here in the right way? And I think we are seeing that happen, and those intersections happen all the time in state water planning projects that have to get advanced, projects that in some instances, many tribal citizens are saying this is in Navajo, Doda, no. However, you're looking at public safety, you're looking at other interests for the public good. So those are the hard decisions. And so I think it goes beyond, the traditional knowledge of how then to respect traditional knowledge from that historical context, but understanding that tribal knowledge and traditional knowledge is also the most forward-thinking academic tool that we can use to guide us in water management planning, because it will not only help us look back to look at historical actions, but also help us move forward in what we do. And I think many of you in this audience and in the virtual audience are scientists, so you can look at how we look at basic graphs on the X and Y axis. And as a weaver, we look at the warp and the weft. And you look at how each of the warps and the wefts and the threads and the threading that you have to do. And I wanted to just kind of, when I was thinking about preparing for this, I wanted to just think about, as a weaver, we all weave a textile together every time we come together. Each one of us is a warp, each one of us is a weft, and we batten down it to make it tight so it's a strong foundation. And sometimes you want to have that space in there, because you also want to have that space for the change. You want to have that space for the knowledge, and you want to have that space for the spirit to come through. And so I think that, I really do appreciate the opportunity to kind of, reach back into my traditional teachings, as a Navajo person and as a Navajo, and we are a matriarchy in my society. So, even the weavings and the type of weavings you do come down through your clans. And I think that that is something super important. I think I have where did that go? The clicker. Did I try? Oh, could you go to slide 4? Brian mentioned earlier this morning about one of the UNDRIP principles, and I don't know if many of you follow UNDRIP, but that's the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And one of the core principles of UNDRIP is understanding free, prior, informed consent. And when we're talking about data sovereignty, traditional knowledge, and tribal knowledge, one of the things that we look at closely at Department of Water Resources and from that academic point of view is, are we applying care and fair principles and into what we do? Because we have that hard, as a tribal liaison, I'm the executive manager of our Office of Tribal Affairs. We are in that rock, in that hard space that everyone always talks about. How do you, advance policy against all odds, literally, against lack of funding, lack of support, lack of even your own staffing, working with underprivileged, disadvantaged communities that are now having abilities to have funding. And you have these life cycles of grants and everything. And so sometimes these life cycles of grants, they don't mesh well with the life cycles of just the everyday human problems that we have to face. And so those are some of the principles that we have to deal with as from the state hat that I actually am wearing right now. And so, in the fair principles of, in terms of sharing and building relationships is, making sure that data that you share and you obtain and that is given to you with that sacred trust and responsibility is findable. It's not just for, as we've seen, just for academic research or for someone's self-gain or someone's self-publication, that it's accessible for all and that it's interoperable, meaning that it is something that becomes part of that warp and that weft and that interweaving, and also it's going to be reusable. that we're taking this knowledge and we're building upon it. And then when you go to the care principles of like this information, this data gathering, are we looking at it from a collective benefit? And does it enable all the partners to really benefit it through inclusivity and equity in terms of that collective benefit of what is those principles? And of course, the authority to control. The authority to control does not, the bearer of it is not the person who receives it. The authority to control is always with the knowledge keepers, the wisdom holders. And so that is something that I think we've always, and Dr. Fontana next to me can always tell you about in the academic circles, that power struggle, because, you know, knowledge is power in the Western world. And we want to keep obtaining that power as much as possible, and it's because of control. And I think that is the shift change that we're going to see, hopefully, through this interweaving series. And of course, the responsibility of Indigenous data management and how then we can maintain the right of the preservation of this information. And the most important is the well-being of priority, and the priority and ethics of what we're doing within that entire concept of data gathering. And I think that, you know, data gathering, it's so critical to our work in state government. We have to gather data every single moment, whether it's traditional knowledge or any other data, and it's about sharing that. So I think my time is up, and I just really wanted to say, you know, thank you for this opportunity. It's always an honor to speak for colleagues, and also I wanted to acknowledge all the elders in the room. So thank you.
Thank you, Anasita. And the rest of the panel. I know we went through a tremendous amount of information in the last, well, just the first question. So I imagine that our audience has, you know, a few questions, so I'll try to leave some time at the end. But I would move on to our second question, and I modified it for you guys. So I didn't want to throw you guys a total curveball, but our second question is, and we'll do a round robin of, if you have something to say, then go ahead and just speak up. What are some of the best practices for obtaining free, prior, and informed consent, and how can organizations, agencies, and researchers build trust throughout this process? Anybody want to speak? Okay.
Communication and respect. If you want to communicate with the people, you need to respect the people. I'm always approached to either speak or for my opinion, which a lot of you probably don't want. And in my years, I've worked with the California state parks. It's kind of big roundabout. I started it when I was with SEBA, and I got their attention about native gathering in state parks, because they're accessible and because it was someplace that weavers and elders could go and still be safe. We developed a permit for weavers to go into the state parks, and it all was around a bush bunny. And my son works for River Partners. River Partners, they purchase land along the rivers in California from farmers, and they take out all invasive species of plants, and they replace them with indigenous plants of the area. And these help bring the rivers back to life. But they also have to save those damn bush bunnies. When I first approached Caswell State Park to use my first permit, about 2 months after we had finally finalized the permits, the superintendent didn't know what I was talking about. and he was refusing to sign. And I said, look, I said, I just want to go and gather the sedge at Caswell State Park. And he said, well, I can't let you because there's an endangered bush bunny. And I looked him straight in the eye and I said, endangered? I said, I'm one of 2 Native Miwok women who still do basket weaving. I said, so who's endangered here, me or that bush bunny? My culture or that bush bunny? My people or that bush bunny? He goes, okay, I'll sign it. And I said, damn right. He said, well, how many people? I said, well, I'm going to bring my whole family, so you can put 8. Okay, well, you can only, each person can only dig a 4x4 area for the roots. I said, I'm not going to disturb your plants. I just want the rhizomes. I said, the bunny doesn't eat those. And so he went ahead and signed without doing his math. And the whole time I'm doing the math thinking, okay, we can got a good going here. And now with my son working for River Partners, they build bush bunny berms along the rivers for these rabbits. And it's just, like a big circle. Everything's in a circle. Life is a circle. Traditions are a circle. We get them passed down. Just last month, my granddaughter cooked her first acorn using the traditional method at a Maidu gathering at Shingle Springs. I think I got off the subject, but it's just water brings us all together. We are part of the water. The water is part of us. And we have to think that way. So in order for us to survive, we have to help the water. We need to stop diverting it, stop polluting it. And one good thing about River Partners is once they develop these indigenous areas along the rivers, they find the tribe in the area and they ask them, will you take stewardship of this land? It's there for your people. We can gather. I worked with the project at Dos Rios, which is the first, which is the largest state park in California. I still work with them today. And one of the first things when I came to them is they said, well, what would you like? I said, a gathering area for my people, for all our people in the area. And so I got together a group and they got those River Partners got the plants and we planted a native gathering area at Dos Rios. And one of the stipulations that River Partners gave the state at Dos Rios was that it was open to all California natives wanting to gather basket weaving, medicinal, or traditional plants. Not pushing River Partners, but they had a lot to do with getting me back into state parks. Besides, it's just important that we take care of the water and we take care of the land. That way we can take care of the people because we're a part of it.
I may have forgotten the question, but she has been talking about River Partners, and I mean, once again, it all comes down to relationships. It's like, just think about a relationship in your life and what does that feel like? Is it real or is it fake? And those are just the basic fundamental things of a relationship. And so, you know, as tribes try to build their relationships, just like you, we can feel what is happening. And that approach is everything, right? And what she was saying, you know, River Partners' approach has been working because they are coming from a different perspective, because they understand, just like what she said. They said, what would you like? What do you need? What would you like to see? That's coming from a different angle. When I worked with River Partners, they actually came to my ceremony, and I actually didn't even know they were there. But that meant everything. It started something, right? It planted the seed, but for them to actually be there on our time doing just what we do, that kind of stuck out to me, because they seeked that out. And so I just wanted to point to that how you approach somebody in a relationship, I mean, it's just common sense, you know, and we can feel that. You can feel what agencies have the spirit of trying and have an open spirit of collaboration versus one that's like, well, you know, we've checked the boxes, it's robotic. Okay, well, we're going to meet next time. So those are very different approaches. And I just really wanted to take my time to point that out, that either, you know, what type of relationship are you building? And for us, you know, we're thinking of longevity. Why? Because our kids are involved in this. This is not just something we're here to, this is our lives. It's our children. She's crying because her granddaughter learned something that it's taken this long for this process to happen. And it makes me want to cry because I'm waiting for all these other young women who need that same thing. And so I just really have to stress, you know, are we in a real relationship or not?
I don't, does Michelle want to say anything online? I don't know.
Michelle, are you there? Is it on?
I don't want to speak.
Does Michelle want to say anything? Alicia?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. So the question is, what are some best practices for obtaining free, prior, and informed consent, and how can organizations, agencies, and researchers build trust throughout this process?
I think one thing that we try to, or what my organization tries to do is we try to make sure we try to communicate as much as possible and try to ensure that like we don't share anything that we're not supposed to, or like, you know, how I previously mentioned in my presentation that we don't we write down what we heard and get confirmation from the partners that we work with, and then we ask like, can we share this or not? Like we'll meet with them, and then like we'll be like, okay, like are you okay with us sharing this with other people? Like, do you want us to take some of this stuff out? Like, what are you comfortable with? And we just try to make sure that we don't cross like any boundaries with the tribes and, you know, make them lose trust with us. and or like share anything that we're not supposed to.
Well, thank you. Nina?
I'll keep it quick. I think, I guess, multiple hats, but like consent is an ongoing process. I think that's a big one. It's not just yes, no. It could be like, not anymore. Like there's all these like in-betweens with understanding the yes, no, not anymore, maybe later process. So just, yeah, it's ongoing. I think as researchers, we're trained to, like, I guess she's like, we want to document everything, right? But sometimes the best thing you can do is close your notebook and listen. And, conversations can carry responsibilities. And I think understanding that, just like Vice Chairman woman Melissa mentioned, thinking about what it's like to be in any relationship. Like, how would you want to be treated in your family, and how would you want to treat someone else? I think it's like a really wonderful baseline when you think about consent.
I'll add to that from a government to government perspective of really knowing the roles of the government agency you represent, or if you're on the other side as a tribal government, really establishing boundaries of your discussion, data sharing. I think, we're talking about prior consent, free, prior, informed consent. So I think it's the information portion of that. And of course, relationship building, because you're not going to be able to get to those hard conversations unless you do have that strong relationship. And it's so common. Honorable Melissa, you're so right. It's like even when someone's looking at a tribal website or a state government website, I always say, can we find the front door if somebody's looking for this? Really? Because you just want to knock on the door and say, hello, how are you? And it's like when you look to meet a tribe, the front door is their tribal website, usually, if you've not had any idea of who to talk to. And that door is always open. There's amazing websites out there. And then for government agencies, why do we hide our front doors? We don't even have a window open sometimes, and even for our own internal staffing. And so that's something that I always look at in terms of like, you want to be neighborly. You want to be able to have an opportunity for someone who has no knowledge of who you are as a state agency or a tribal government. How then do you make that relationship work and build upon it?
Thank you, Anacita, and thank you to our panelists. We have a little bit of time without asking the other 7 questions that I had. So I guess I'll open it up to the floor. So anybody have questions, comments, concerns? I take compliments. And just raise your hand, and I think somebody will give you a microphone.
So understanding, I know that there's no magic potion, I was going to say silver bullet, but more like a magic potion that can help people understand that Kimberly said about communicating and respecting that process of the person they're talking to. A lot of agencies are responsible for building things and understanding that it's oftentimes a tremendous challenge to balance what the needs are of your of the tribes that you're working with what ultimately your goal is. Again, Asita said that California is the 4th largest economy in the world, and it was largely built that way because of a lot of things that happened in the past that are awful, and there's no denying that. So how do we as lead agencies continue to balance that some of that, there's a legacy of destruction that still occurs, and to understand that, that compromise, finding that compromise sometimes, and like every relationship is made up of a lot of compromise, but not at the detriment of these communities that we rely on. So what are some of the successes that you've seen in being able to strike that balance where we are not erasing these communities, but still uplifting them while at the same time, doing what we are really chartered by the state government or by the state to do. And if you could keep your answer to like 30 seconds, that'd be great.
I'm thinking.
I can leave my email too.
It's a lot to process, and I think that I'm sorry.
Maybe just a thought.
Good words, dam removal. I mean, you entered indigenous knowledge, you began to recognize their governance authority and the history that they have, and the understanding of the watersheds and ecology was much deeper wisdom. And so I think finally the ancient agencies finally saying what needed to happen. So I would say that as an example of
Thank you.
embracing indigenous knowledge and guidance in the future.
Yeah. Now, thank you, Brian. I think also many things that are moving forward in absence of dam removal, like just basic meadow restoration and fish passage. Also, the incorporation of recent legislation requiring cultural burns as a practice. And as Honorable Ron Good, whose pictures were with us all morning, he always says fire brings water. And I think that concept is still being captured over into the non-tribal community about how important it is and what you see. And I do think that there's lots of good examples out there, but maybe just, it's a challenge to really put your hand on it. But I think one of the things I'm really proud of is the work we're doing on fish passage restoration and looking for the new Prop 4 climate bond funding to really fund a major portion of the work we do at DWR.
Yeah, I apologize. I think that there are some really good examples, probably ones that, my cultural department would probably have some better examples. But I know for sure there are good things happening with agencies. I know that. It is not as if nothing good is happening. There are a lot of good things happening. And Chairman Wallace just brought up one of the biggest victories. And obviously, that is a great example. I'm just waiting for that victory to happen here in our region. But yes, I think that there are a lot of positive examples of what a good relationship can produce.
Online question.
Any advice on navigating how to work with tribes that are not federally or state recognized and are not acknowledged by the federally recognized tribe?
I can start with that. As a state agency representing Department of Water Resources, Executive Order B1011 and in 1519, and it's been codified with various other assembly bills thereafter, requires state agencies to work with all tribes in California. And B1011 says it's non-federally recognized tribes as well as federally recognized tribes. There isn't a state recognition process in the state of California. The recognition that sometimes gets the misnomer is whether you're on the consultation list that's maintained by the Native American Heritage Commission in terms for protection of cultural resources. But I do think that as a state agency, and I can speak for California Natural Resources Agency, they have just released a revised tribal consultation policy. It states very clearly if you're working with any of the 29 departments in this building, the Natural Resources building, we will be coordinating, consulting, in informing and updating all tribes in California.
Anybody else got a question? No. We have a question here in the front.
I work for CDFW and my team is part of coordinating the Endangered Species Act, California Endangered Species Act. And there is always kind of a shortage of lands. Proponents are often struggling with finding meaningful mitigation or to mitigate impacts to listed species. I'm wondering if anyone maybe has any ideas what would be the best approach to maybe work with tribes to help involve them in the process.
When it comes to mitigation measures, and if you're with CDFW, I think for any agencies, especially if you're under natural resources, there are tribal liaisons within every program. That's a really great start. And then, of course, making sure that you obtain the formal consultation list from Native American Heritage Commission, which is not the list. Some people assume that that's the only list. There are many tribes that may not be on those consultation lists that the Heritage Commission has, or their list may not be totally updated. But I think due diligence, you've heard before here about the relationships, is really being able to be able to start your process. But I always will, the go-to is your regional coordinators, and of course the tribal liaison that represents your department or agency.
And I just wanted to add, keep trying, call again, write another email. I mean, just keep trying. The one attempts or the two or the three, that's not an attempt to me. Because you guys really have to keep in mind that every tribe is at a different spot. I mean, where my tribe was 30 years ago and where we are today is totally different, but it took us 30 years to get here. But I have neighboring tribes who are 20 years behind me or more. For them to get to the meeting, it's a lot harder. They're thinking about gas money. They're thinking about a vehicle. Call again and call again and call again. A lot of our offices, a lot of changes could happen rapidly. A new job title can happen, and you're stuck in between whatever phones. But I just highly recommend that you keep trying, and even try 2 or 3 people within the tribe. I mean, I'm just saying, if you guys really want to work with tribes, you really have to make an attempt to get to them. And sometimes, just to let you know, it's very intimidating. A lot of our tribal members may not be, it's very intimidating to talk to people sometimes outside of your community. And so I just wanted to bring that up because sometimes it's hard to get in contact with tribes, but it does not mean that they do not want to participate. So I just wanted to remind you guys.
And I wanted to add to that, even though I'm not part of the panel, is a non-answer or a non-response doesn't automatically mean, that they approve the project or anything like that. It's just, always in these departments is always one person for this entire department, as opposed to agencies with 20, 30 people in those agencies, and they have many different agencies and universities and researchers trying to get their attention. So I always keep that in mind. Is if they don't respond to you, doesn't mean that they approve it. I know we've run out of time, so I'm going to pass it over to Dylan, but can we get a round of applause to Anna? Thank you, guys.
Sharing all of great appreciation from people for all of that. And I do just want to close out very briefly because we don't want to keep you from your lunch any longer. But I think we had one question come up around some of the topics that have been covered today that was about, oh, well, will people there have heard some of this before? And hopefully some of you have heard some of this before, and some of you may not have. But when we think about, as a scientist, an ecologist, I sit in a lot of meetings where we hear the same things over and over again. It's part of building our capacity around these things. It's part of normalizing them. And so I hope you come back and you hear all these things 5, 10, 15 more times, because we need repetition for these things to become normal in the context of what we're doing. And so to that end, we would we'll put the slide back up on the screen with the information about our next couple events as part of this series. So hopefully you can join us on July 14th. Please do register to get a chance. And just a few quick notes about lunch here as well that I've been asked to share. So lunches are outside on the catering tables. If you registered through Eventbrite and you selected the lunch option, you can go there. If you didn't, we may have some extras, but if you can get folks who ordered them first grab, that would be great. There's also an optional networking bingo activity that you can pick up from staff out there with candy and stickers as prizes. You don't have to register for the candy. So. And then for eating the lunches, there's seating on the first floor in the dining cafeteria area, which is right below us, both inside and outside. And there's also more seats on the north and west side of the building over here. And then we feel free to come back up here when you're done eating. And the Delta Climate Adaptation Team meeting will start at 1:30. So we do hope that some of you can stay for that as well. There's a lot of overlap. So thanks again, everybody, for coming today. And let's just get a final round of applause for our panel.
They want you to stand in front.